Okay, first thing you want to do on problem 13 is grab your handout and see if this, whoops, there, matches any of these. And they don't have to be in the same order, because on the fallacy of the inverse, one of my premises is an if P then Q, and the other one is a negation of P, just like I have here, those two. Can't keep these on the screen at the same time. So they match as far as the premises, but the conclusion here does not match this conclusion. So that's as close as I can get with any of these. So it's not one of the 6 arguments that we already know about. So we have to do an entire truth table on this by ourselves. So the first thing I need to do is rewrite this from a vertical format to horizontal. So my first premise is the negation of P. My second premise is if P, then Q. And remember that you connect these with an and then between, since I've written down all my premises, those are going to go in a bracket with an if-then arrow in between them, and then you're going to finish it with your conclusion, which will go here. So I'm going to write this as negation of P and if P then Q, and then an if-then statement ending with if Q then P. So I need to make a truth table of that, and I only have the 2 statements P and Q, so I'm going to start with P and Q, and remember that goes true, 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 false, false, true, false, false, and then I'll have the negation of P and if P then Q. Those are my premises. And then an if then, and then if Q, then P. And then I'm going to go through with my pencil, and there should be 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. And then those are like that. And then the negation of P gets its own column. The and, the P, the if then, the Q, the if then, the Q, the if then, and the P. It's a little tight there, but. And then I'll go through and I will fill in anything that is just copying. So I have 2 columns in my table that have a heading of P. This one here, so this is going to be true, true, false, false. And also down at the end I have another P, so true, true, false, false. And then I have 2 Q's. This Q here goes true, false, true, false. And so does this one, true, false, true, false. Okay, so that's all the copying I can do. Everything else, I'm going to have to do a calculation, and I'll use different colored pens for that. So I'm going to go from left to right. The first thing I'll do is this negation of P, and since P is true, true, false, false, this becomes false, false, true, true. So I got this one simply by looking at the P and negating it. My next step will be here, this column, the if then, and to get this one it's going to have to be if the P column then the Q column. And so if true then true is true, if true then false, that's the false one, and everything else is true. The only time you get a false on an if then is when it's if true then false. All right, and now step 3 is going to be to connect my premises. So to get this one, this column here, I'm going to have to compare the blue and the yellow. My and comes between those two. Now on an and, the only time you get a true is when they're both true. So focusing on the blue and the yellow, the third one is a T and a T, and so is the fourth one. But the first one is a false and true, and the second one's a false and false, so those are both falses. All right, next I'm going to come over here to this column. This will be my fourth step, and I have to do this if then between if Q then P. And remember, the only time you get a false is when it's an if true then false, and that's this one right here. If true then false. The first one's if true then true, that's true. If false then true is true, and if false then false is true on an if then. And that brings me down to my very last step, which I will do in orange, and this is gonna be step 5. And on these things, this is always your last step, the if then that separates all of this and all of this. I think I went off my edge there. So to get this one, you're going to have to compare it with the last step you did over here, which is step 3, and then the only step that I did over here was step 4, because the stuff in black was just me copying. I wasn't doing any calculating. And now I do an if then between the green column and the pinkish reddish column, pink column. And again, on an if then, the only time you get a false is when it's if true then false. And that would be this one here. Because if false then true is true. If false then true is true. But if true then false, right here. If true then false, that's a false. If true then true is true. So because you have just one F in here, that is enough to say that it is invalid. And that's 13.